The threadbare carpet of my apartment hallway was a roadmap of my failures, stained with spilled coffee from rushed mornings and tracked in mud from days I was too tired to care. It smelled of damp and defeat. I traced the peeling paint on the doorframe with a trembling finger, the eviction notice a brittle, mocking ghost in my other hand. 3 days. In 3 days, my son, Leo, and I would be homeless. The thought was a block of ice in my stomach, so cold it burned. Leo's cough echoed from his small bedroom, a dry, rattling sound that had become the soundtrack to my sleepless nights. The doctor said it was just a persistent chest infection, nothing serious, but it required antibiotics I couldn't afford, and rest he couldn't get in a home filled with the chill of impending doom. My last paycheck from the nursing home had been eaten by past due bills before it even cleared, and my termination for taking too much unpaid time off to care for Leo had severed my last lifeline. Desperation was a foul taste in my mouth, metallic and sharp like blood. It was what had led me here, to this moment, pulling on a starched white shirt that wasn't mine, preparing to serve champagne and canapes to people whose shoes cost more than my rent. A one-night catering gig. A pittance. $150 that felt like $1 million and also like nothing at all. It wouldn't stop the eviction, but it would buy food. It would buy another day of pretending. My reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror was a stranger. A woman with shadows for eyes and a tension in her jaw that had become permanent. I was Alara Vance, a registered nurse, a mother. But tonight, I was just a pair of hands, invisible and silent, at the Blackwood Gala. The ballroom was another world. It was a universe away from my crumbling apartment building, a breathtaking spectacle of gold and crystal. Chandeliers dripped light like frozen waterfalls, splashing across the polished marble floor where men in tailored tuxedos and women in jewel-toned gowns drifted like elegant, exotic fish. The air hummed with the murmur of 100 privileged conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the soft, melodic strains of a string quartet. It smelled of expensive perfume, wax candles, and money. So much money. I moved through the crowd with a tray of glistening hors d'oeuvres, my face set in a polite, neutral mask I had perfected. Be invisible. Do the job. Get the money. Go home to Leo. It was a mantra I repeated with every beat of my anxious heart. I was refilling champagne flutes near a towering floral arrangement when a hand clamped down on my arm, the grip painfully familiar. I flinched, my blood turning to slush. I didn't have to look. I knew the cloying scent of his cheap cologne, the possessive heat of his touch. Mark. Ellie, he wheezed, his breath soured with alcohol. There you are. I've been looking for you. My tray rattled, the delicate glasses threatening to topple. I stabilized it, my knuckles white. Let go of me, Mark. What are you doing here? He didn't belong here. He was a creature of dive bars and betting shops, not gilded ballrooms. He wore a rumpled suit that looked like he'd slept in it, his tie askew, a desperate glint in his bloodshot eyes. I need to talk to you, he hissed, pulling me behind a marble column, out of the main flow of traffic. I need money, Ellie. Just a couple hundred. I've got a sure thing. I can pay you back double by tomorrow. The audacity of it was a physical blow. The man who had gambled away our savings, who had taken the money I'd set aside for Leo's future and pissed it away on horses that never won, was here, asking for more. The ice in my stomach shattered into a million furious shards. I don't have any money, Mark. You know that. You made sure of that. My voice was low, trembling with a rage I was desperately trying to contain. This was not the place. I could be fired. I needed this paltry $150. Don't lie to me, he sneered, his grip tightening. You're working. You always have a little something stashed away. He gestured vaguely at the opulent room. These people are loaded. Just slip a wallet. No one would even notice. Are you insane? The words burst out of me, louder than I intended. A few heads turned in our direction before quickly turning away, uninterested in the troubles of the serving staff. I'm not a thief. I'm not you. You're the mother of my child, he retorted, his voice rising to match mine. You owe me. Leo is my son, too. I have a right to ask for help. That broke the dam. The carefully constructed wall of my composure crumbled into dust. The polite mask fell away, revealing the raw, frantic desperation beneath. "Your son?" My voice cracked, then rose, sharp and clear, cutting through the sophisticated hum of the room. "You haven't seen your son in 6 months. You don't know that he's sick, that he coughs all night, that we are being thrown out of our home in 3 days because you stole every last cent we had. You have no rights, Mark. You have no shame. You are nothing to us." My voice echoed in the cavernous space. The string quartet faltered, a violin squeaking into silence. The gentle murmur of conversation died. Every single head in that ballroom turned towards us. 100 pairs of eyes, curious, annoyed, disdainful, all fixed on the hysterical waitress and the pathetic drunk behind the column. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. I had done it. I had made a scene. I was fired. The $150 was gone. Everything was gone. Then, from a large, circular table at the center of the room, a man stood up. He wasn't the tallest man there, but he commanded the space as if he were a giant. He was dressed in a black tuxedo so exquisitely tailored, it seemed molded to the hard lines of his body. His hair was dark, his face a collection of sharp, severe angles. He didn't look at me. He surveyed the silent, watching crowd, his expression one of profound, icy boredom. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried an impossible weight, a resonant baritone that silenced the very air. It was a voice accustomed to absolute, unquestioning obedience. "Clear the room." It was not a request, it was a decree. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd, lasting only a second before it was replaced by something else. Fear. Men in identical black suits, previously invisible against the walls, moved with silent, synchronized efficiency. They weren't security guards. They moved like soldiers, or predators. They began to usher the guests out, their suggestions not suggestions at all. There was no panic, just a swift, orderly, and deeply unnerving exodus. Husbands guided their wives, their eyes darting towards the man in the center of the room, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror. Within 2 minutes, the vast, echoing ballroom was empty. Empty, except for me, Mark, the man who had given the order, and a handful of his black-suited sentinels positioned by the doors. The string quartet had vanished as if they had never been. Mark was frozen, his hand having dropped from my arm as if he'd been burned. His face, already pale, had turned a pasty, sickly white. He stared at the man, who now turned his gaze towards us. The man's eyes were the color of dark, stormy water, and they held an unnerving stillness. He looked from Mark's terrified face to my own stunned one, his expression unreadable. One of the sentinels, a broad-shouldered man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, glided silently to the man's side. He murmured something too low for me to hear. The man, the king who had emptied his court with a single sentence, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. His eyes never left me. It felt as though he were dissecting me, peeling back the layers of my cheap uniform and my carefully constructed composure to see the raw, terrified woman beneath. The silence was a living thing, pressing in on me, amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. He took a step towards us, then another. The sound of his leather shoes on the marble floor was like the deliberate tolling of a bell. Mark made a small, whimpering sound, a pathetic noise that filled me with disgust. The man stopped a few feet away, his gaze finally shifting to Mark, a flicker of something cold and dangerous in their depths. "You are the father of her child?" he asked. The question was soft, almost conversational, yet it vibrated with menace. Mark swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. Yes, we were just talking. You were harassing her," the man corrected him, his tone flat. "It was a statement of fact, not an accusation. You were demanding money she does not have. Money you stole from her." My breath hitched. How could he? "Oh, know that!" I had shouted it, yes, but he stated it with such certainty, as if he had read a detailed report on my miserable life. Mark's eyes widened in panic. "No, it's a misunderstanding." The man's lips curved in a smile that held no warmth, no humor. It was the baring of teeth. "I do not have misunderstandings." He glanced at the sentinel with the scarred eyebrow. "Roman, get him out of my sight." and make sure he understands that he is to never come within 1,000 feet of Miss Vance or her son again. Make the lesson memorable. Yes, Mr. Moretti, Roman said, his voice a low rumble. He and another man seized Mark by the arms. Mark didn't even have time to protest, his mouth opening and closing like a fish as he was half dragged, half carried towards a service exit, his expensive shoes scuffing pathetically on the marble. The door swung shut behind them, and the silence that descended was even more profound than before. Now, it was just me and him, Dante Moretti. The name Roman had used clicked into place, dredged up from newspaper headlines and hushed rumors I'd overheard at the hospital. The Moretti family, a name synonymous with wealth, power, and a darkness that the city pretended did not exist. He was not just a rich man, he was a king of a different sort, one whose kingdom was built in the shadows, and I was standing alone with him in an empty ballroom, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. He turned his full attention to me. The force of his gaze was a physical thing, a weight that pinned me in place. "Alara Vance," he said, my name sounding strange and foreign on his lips. 28 years old, registered nurse, recently terminated from the Northgate Senior Care Facility. You live at 417 Maple Street, apartment 3B. Your son Leo is 5. He has a recurring bronchial infection. Your rent is 10 days overdue, and you have an eviction hearing scheduled in 72 hours. Each word was a perfectly placed stone, building a wall around me, proving my utter transparency to him. The blood drained from my face. In the few minutes it had taken to clear the room, he had learned the entire pathetic story of my life. This was a power I couldn't comprehend. It was terrifying. Who are you?" I whispered, the question absurd. I knew who he was. "I am the man who is going to solve your problems," he stated simply. He took another step closer. I could smell the clean, crisp scent of his suit, the faint, masculine fragrance of something that smelled like cedar and bergamot. It was a stark contrast to Mark's sour, alcoholic stench. But not here. He gestured towards the main doors. "Roman will take you home to collect your son. Pack a bag for both of you. You will not be returning to that apartment." My mind reeled, unable to process the sheer arrogance of his commands. "Go home? Pack a bag? I don't understand. I can't just leave with you. I don't even know you." "You know enough," he said, his eyes holding mine. There was no room for argument in his gaze. "You know that your other options have run out. You can stay here and debate the point, and in 3 days you and your sick child will be on the street. Or you can accept the help that is being offered." "This isn't help," I shot back, a spark of my earlier fire returning. I don't know what this is. A kidnapping?" A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his face. "Miss Vance, if I wanted to kidnap you, you would already be in the trunk of my car. This is an extraction from a life that is killing you." He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment on my worn-out server shoes. "Roman is waiting. The car is running. Go home. Get your son." He turned and began to walk away, his back straight, his posture radiating an absolute certainty that I would obey. It was the most infuriating, terrifying, and strangely compelling thing I had ever witnessed. I stood there for a moment, my thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. He was right. My options were gone. My pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. Leo's wheezing cough echoed in my memory. Taking a shaky breath, I turned and walked towards the grand entrance. Roman, the man with the scarred eyebrow, stood holding the door open. His expression was impassive, his eyes revealing nothing. As I passed him, he spoke, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "This way, Miss Vance." Outside, the cool night air was a shock to my system. A long, black limousine, so polished it seemed to drink the city lights, was parked at the curb, its engine purring softly. It was an ostentatious display of power, a declaration. Roman opened the rear door, and I hesitated, my hand on the cool metal. This felt like stepping off a cliff, but my old life was a crumbling ledge anyway. With a sense of surreal detachment, I slid onto the plush, leather seat. The door closed with a solid, final-sounding thud, sealing me inside, and the car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the night, carrying me away from the world I knew, and towards a future I couldn't possibly imagine. The ride to my apartment was silent. I sat rigid on the buttery leather, the sheer luxury of the vehicle, a stark, painful contrast to the squalor I was about to retrieve my son from. The car was impossibly quiet, insulating me from the familiar noises of the city. It felt like being in a tomb or a womb. I couldn't decide which. Roman sat in the front passenger seat, a stoic silhouette against the passing streetlights. He never looked back, never spoke a word. The driver was equally anonymous. They were pieces of Dante Moretti's world, extensions of his will. I felt less like a person, and more like a package being delivered. When we arrived at my building, its crumbling facade and flickering entryway light looked even more pathetic than usual next to the gleaming behemoth parked at the curb. I expected Roman to wait in the car, but as I stepped out, he was right behind me. "I'll escort you up," he said. It wasn't a question. "I can go by myself," I said, my voice thin. "Mr. Moretti's orders," he replied, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. He followed me into the dingy lobby, his expensive shoes silent on the cracked linoleum. The air smelled of stale cabbage and dust. I was acutely aware of his presence behind me as I climbed the 3 flights of stairs, the sound of my own ragged breathing loud in my ears. I was bringing one of the wolves into my broken little den. I unlocked the door to apartment 3B and pushed it open. The single lamp I'd left on cast a weak, yellowy glow over the living room, illuminating the threadbare sofa, the secondhand coffee table, and the stacks of medical journals I couldn't bring myself to throw away. It was meager, but it was mine. It was home. Leo's cough came from the bedroom, and my heart clenched. Roman stopped just inside the doorway, his large frame seeming to shrink the already small space. He surveyed the room with that same impassive gaze, but I could feel the judgment, or perhaps just the observation, of a man accustomed to palatial estates and limitless luxury. He was seeing the poverty I tried so hard to hide. The shame was a hot flush on my cheeks. "Pack what you and the boy will need for a few weeks," he instructed quietly. "Clothes, personal items, medicine." I nodded numbly and went into Leo's room. He was asleep, his small face pale in the dim light from the hallway, his breathing a soft, wheezing whistle. A fresh wave of love and fear washed over me. He was so small, so fragile, and I was about to take him into the heart of a world I didn't understand, a world of danger and dark power, all on the word of a man I had just met. But what was the alternative? The street? A homeless shelter where his cough would only get worse? I knelt by his bed and gently brushed his hair off his forehead. He stirred but didn't wake. I moved with a desperate, quiet efficiency, pulling a duffel bag from the top of the closet and filling it with his clothes, his favorite worn teddy bear, and the inhaler the clinic had given us. Then I went to my own room, my hands shaking as I threw a few pairs of jeans, sweaters, and my nursing scrubs into another bag. My scrubs, the symbol of a life and a career that felt a million miles away now. It was all I had that was truly mine. I grabbed my toothbrush and the small, framed photo of Leo and me from my nightstand. It felt like I was packing for the end of the world. When I emerged with the 2 bags, Roman was still standing by the door, a silent, imposing statue. He took the bags from me without a word, his expression unchanged. I went back for Leo, scooping his warm, sleeping body into my arms. He mumbled something and snuggled his head into my shoulder, his small hand clutching my shirt. Holding him, I felt a surge of protective instinct so fierce it nearly brought me to my knees. Whatever happened, I would keep him safe. As I followed Roman out, I took one last look at the apartment. The eviction notice was still on the coffee table, a white rectangle in the gloom. It was a life of struggle, of constant fear and worry, but it was our life. I was leaving it behind. I pulled the door shut, the click of the lock sounding like a final goodbye. The journey to Dante Moretti's home was longer this time, taking us out of the city and into the winding, wooded roads of the countryside north of the metropolis. We passed through a set of enormous wrought iron gates, the name Moretti, spelled out in elegant, severe letters. A long, tree-lined driveway led to a house, no, a mansion, a palace that seemed to rise out of the darkness like a mountain. It was a modern fortress of glass, dark stone and steel, lit with a cold architectural precision that made it look both beautiful and utterly intimidating. It didn't look like a home, it looked like a headquarters. The limousine pulled into a circular driveway in front of a massive front door made of dark, polished wood. As we stopped, the door swung open, and Dante Moretti himself was standing there, framed in the light from the entryway. He had changed out of his tuxedo and was now wearing simple black trousers and a charcoal gray cashmere sweater. The casual clothes did nothing to soften his intensity. If anything, they made him seem more dangerous, less like a character in a play and more like a predator in his natural habitat. Roman opened my door, and I slid out, clutching a still sleeping Leo tightly. Dante's eyes immediately went to my son, and for a fleeting instant, his hard expression seemed to soften. It was so brief I thought I might have imagined it. "Bring them inside," he said to Roman, then his gaze met mine. "He can sleep. I've had a room, and prepared for him." I followed him into the house. If the exterior was a fortress, the interior was a museum. The foyer was a cavern of white marble and dark wood, with a ceiling that soared 2 stories high. A grand, sweeping staircase curved upwards into the shadows. The air was still and cool, carrying the same faint scent of cedar I'd noticed on him earlier. There was no clutter, no sign of life, just vast, empty spaces, priceless-looking modern art on the walls, and a silence that was even more profound than in the car. It was the quiet of immense, untouchable wealth. "This way," Dante said, leading me down a long hallway. His footsteps were silent on the polished stone floor. I felt clumsy and loud behind him, my worn boots and my son's gentle snores seeming to profane the sterile perfection of the space. He opened a door to a suite of rooms. "This will be yours," he said. The main room was a spacious living area with a plush, cream-colored sofa, a fireplace, and a wall of glass that looked out onto a dark, manicured garden. To one side was a large bedroom with a king-sized bed, and to the other, a smaller room, clearly intended for a child. It was already furnished with a bed, a small desk, and a bookshelf filled with new-looking children's books. A brand-new, top-of-the-line air purifier hummed softly in the corner. He had prepared for us. The thought was both comforting and deeply unsettling. He had been so certain I would come. I carried Leo into the smaller room and gently laid him down on the bed. He barely stirred. I pulled the soft duvet up to his chin, my hand lingering on his cheek. He was safe. He was warm. He was in a clean room with purified air. For tonight, at least, I had done the right thing. When I turned, Dante was standing in the doorway, watching me. The intensity was back in his eyes, a focused, possessive heat. "A doctor will be here in the morning to see him," he said. "One of the best pediatric pulmonologists in the country. He is on my payroll." I just stared at him, overwhelmed. A private doctor, a mansion, an escape. It was too much to process. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" He moved from the doorway into the sitting room, gesturing for me to follow. I did, feeling like a pawn on his personal chessboard. He stood before the cold, dark fireplace, his hands in his pockets. "I told you. I am solving your problems," he said, his voice low and resonant in the quiet room. "That apartment, the debt, the lack of medical care for your son, the man who put you in that position, they are all symptoms of a life that is beneath you. I am providing the cure." "And what's the price?" I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. It was a defensive gesture, and I knew it looked weak, but I couldn't help it. "People like you don't do things for free. What do you want from me?" He was silent for a long moment, studying my face, his expression unreadable. "I want you to be safe," he said finally, "and I want you to be here, with me. Here, as your prisoner?" "As my guest," he countered, though the word sounded hollow. "You and Leo will live here. You will want for nothing. His health will be my priority. Your debts will be cleared. The man, Mark, will never trouble you again. He has been permanently relocated." The casual, chilling finality of that statement sent a shiver down my spine. Permanently relocated. I didn't dare ask what it meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. And in exchange? I pressed. In exchange, you stay, he said. You do not leave this property without my knowledge and my protection. You accept that your life is now intertwined with mine. You are under my care, which means you are mine to protect. The word hung in the air between us. Mine. It was possessive, absolute, and terrifying. He wasn't offering a partnership. He was declaring ownership. I thought of the eviction notice. I thought of Leo's cough. I thought of Mark's grubby hands on my arm. Then I looked at this man, at the incredible, dangerous power he wielded so effortlessly. He was offering me a gilded cage, but the world outside that cage was about to swallow me and my son whole. I don't have a choice, do I said, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a weary resignation. There is always a choice, Ilara, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly as he used my first name again. You can walk out that door right now. I will have my driver take you and your son to any homeless shelter in the city you choose. That is your choice. He paused, letting the brutal reality of his words sink in. Or you can stay. You can choose a warm bed for your child. You can choose to have him seen by a doctor who can make him well. You can choose safety and security over chaos and fear. The choice is yours. But I think we both know there is only one real answer. He was right. It was a cruel illusion of choice, but he was right. I looked around the beautiful, sterile room. It was a cage, yes, but it was the safest place I had ever been. I'll stay, I whispered, the words tasting like surrender. A slow, satisfied smile touched his lips. It transformed his harsh face, making him look younger and devastatingly handsome. Good, he said. Now, get some rest. A new wardrobe will be delivered for you and Leo in the morning. We have much to discuss tomorrow. He turned and left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving me alone in the opulent silence of my new prison. I sank onto the sofa, the plush cushions enveloping me, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry. I cried for the life I had lost, for the freedom I had just signed away, and with a confusing, terrifying flicker of something else, I cried with a profound, bone-deep sense of relief. I woke to the unfamiliar sensation of complete and utter silence, not the inner-city silence, which was really just a low hum of distant traffic and sirens, but a deep, profound quiet that was broken only by the gentle chirping of birds outside. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind struggling to place the plush pillows and the impossibly high thread count sheets. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back in a tidal wave of unreality. The gala, Mark, the commanding voice of Dante Moretti, the silent car ride, this gilded cage. I sat up, my heart thudding. Leo. I threw back the heavy duvet and padded on bare feet across the thick, soft carpet to his room. He was still asleep, but his breathing was different. The wheezing rattle was gone, replaced by a clearer, deeper rhythm. I crept closer and saw the new air purifier humming away in the corner, and a small, discreet humidifier on his nightstand that hadn't been there when I put him to bed. Dante's people were ghosts, silent and efficient. A wave of gratitude, so powerful it was nauseating, washed over me. This was what his power could do. It could make my son breathe easier while he slept. Back in the main sitting area of the suite, I found that more ghosts had been at work. Neatly arranged on the sofa were several large, elegant shopping bags from high-end department stores and exclusive boutiques I'd only ever seen in magazines. Hesitantly, I opened one. Inside, folded in tissue paper, were soft cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, and perfectly tailored trousers. Another bag held designer jeans, another held delicate lingerie, and a final, heavy box contained several pairs of shoes, including practical but beautiful leather boots. There were similar, smaller bags filled with clothes for Leo. It was more than I'd owned in my entire life, a fortune in fabric and leather, all of it selected with an unnerving accuracy for my size. I felt like a doll being dressed by an unseen hand. A soft knock on the door made me jump. I clutched the silk blouse in my hand like a shield. Yes? Good morning, Miss Vance, a polite female voice said from the other side. Mr. Moretti has sent breakfast for you and your son. May I come in? I opened the door to a woman in a simple, smart black dress. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She smiled warmly as she pushed a trolley into the room, laden with silver-domed platters, a pot of coffee, fresh orange juice, and a small vase of white roses. "My name is Sophia. I am the head of household staff," she said, her voice gentle. "Mr. Moretti asked me to let you know that the doctor will be here at 10 o'clock. He also said to tell you he will be waiting for you in the library when you are ready." "Thank you, Sophia," I murmured, overwhelmed by the normalcy of it all. Breakfast service, a housekeeper. It was a world away from stale cereal and the constant fear of an empty refrigerator. "It is my pleasure," she said with another small smile before quietly letting herself out. I ate, the food so delicious it was almost tasteless. My anxiety blunted my senses. I dressed in a pair of the new dark jeans and a simple cream-colored sweater. The fabric was so soft it felt like a caress. The clothes fit perfectly. It was another reminder of how thoroughly I had been investigated, my life and my body catalogued by this powerful, mysterious man. At precisely 10 o'clock, another knock came. This time it was Sophia, with a man in a beautifully cut suit who carried a classic leather doctor's bag. He was older, with silver hair and a calm, reassuring demeanor. He introduced himself as Dr. Albrecht. He was gentle and kind, with a newly awakened and very shy Leo, his examination thorough and unhurried. After listening to Leo's chest and asking me a series of detailed questions, he delivered his verdict. "It is as you suspected, Miss Vance. A severe bronchial inflammation, exacerbated by environmental allergens, likely dust and perhaps some mold," he said, his eyes sympathetic. "He needs a strong course of antibiotics and nebulizer treatments for a few days. The clean air here will do him a world of good. With proper care, he will be back to his old self in no time." He produced the medicine and a small, quiet nebulizer from his bag as if by magic. He showed me how to use it, his instructions clear and concise. It was the kind of attentive, top-tier medical care that I, a nurse, could never have dreamed of affording for my own son. "Send any bills to me," I started to say out of habit, then stopped, realizing the absurdity of the statement. Dr. Albrecht simply smiled. "There is no bill, Miss Vance. Your family's health is Mr. Moretti's concern now." "Your family," the words echoed in my head long after he had gone. After settling a much happier Leo in front of the television with a glass of juice and a plate of pancakes, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to face Dante. I found Sophia in the hallway and asked her to show me to the library. The library was as grand and intimidating as the rest of the house. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes, a rolling ladder, and a fireplace large enough to stand in. Dante Moretti was not reading. He was standing by a massive oak desk, speaking in low, rapid Italian on the phone. He gestured for me to enter, his dark eyes watching me as I walked hesitantly into the center of the room. He ended his call with a curt phrase and tossed the phone onto the desk. "Good morning, Alara," he said. The sound of my name in that room, in his voice, still sent a strange jolt through me. "I trust the doctor was satisfactory?" "Yes, thank you," I said, my voice small. I don't know how to thank you. For him, for Leo." "There is no need for thanks," he said, dismissing my gratitude with a wave of his hand. "His well-being is my responsibility now, as is yours." He gestured to one of the large leather armchairs in front of the desk. "Please, sit." I sat on the edge of the chair, feeling like an applicant at a terrifying job interview. He remained standing, a deliberate power play that put him in a position of authority, looking down at me. "Last night, you accepted my protection," he began, his tone all business. "Today, we will clarify the terms of that protection. This is my world, Alara. It has rules. For you to be safe in it, you must understand them." I simply nodded, my hands clenched in my lap. "Rule 1, he said, holding up a finger. "Your safety is paramount. That means you do not leave these grounds without me or without an escort I have personally assigned. No exceptions. The gates are guarded. The perimeter is monitored. Do not test this. Rule 2, you will not contact anyone from your old life. No friends, no former colleagues. Your phone has been disposed of. A new one will be provided. with pre-approved contacts only. For now, that list is just me and Sophia. The casual way he spoke of isolating me from my entire world was chilling. Rule 3, he continued, his voice dropping slightly. You will be honest with me, always. I do not tolerate lies or omissions. If you need something, you will ask me. If you have a problem, you will bring it to me. I am the sole provider of solutions now. Is that clear? You're imprisoning me, I stated, the words coming out stronger than I expected. I am protecting you, he countered without missing a beat. There is a difference. A prison is meant to punish. This fortress is meant to preserve. You are valuable, Alara, and valuable things must be kept safe. Valuable to whom? To you, I challenged, looking up at him. Why? You don't know me. You heard me yelling in a ballroom for 5 minutes. Why go to all this trouble for a stranger? He was silent for a long time, his dark gaze seeming to look right through me, into a past I couldn't see. He moved from behind the desk and walked to the window, staring out at the sprawling, perfectly manicured lawns. I know desperation when I hear it, he said, his back still to me. His voice was different now, quieter, laced with something that sounded like old pain. And I know the sound of a woman fighting for her child. It's a sound I am familiar with. He turned back to face me, his expression guarded, but I could see a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. It was the same flicker I'd thought I imagined the night before when he first saw Leo. My mother, he began, his voice a low murmur. She was a good woman, a kind woman. She came from nothing. My father, he was a powerful man, like me, but he was not a good man. He saw her, and he wanted her, so he took her. He gave her a beautiful home, jewels, clothes, a gilded cage. But he did not give her respect. He did not give her safety. I listened, mesmerized, my own situation fading into the background as he painted a picture of his past. He had enemies, and one day, his enemies decided to use her to get to him. They saw her as a weakness, a vulnerability he had allowed into his life. He was arrogant. He thought his walls were high enough, his men strong enough. He was wrong. He paused, his jaw tightening, a muscle feathering along his cheek. I was 10 years old. I was in the house. I heard her scream. By the time I got to her, it was too late. My father's protection failed. He failed her. The silence in the room was heavy with the weight of his confession. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man forged in a crucible of tragedy, a boy who had watched his mother die because his father wasn't powerful enough or careful enough to protect her. Last night, he continued, his eyes locking with mine again, the vulnerability gone, replaced by a fierce, burning intensity. When I heard your voice, that raw, desperate defiance, I heard her. And when I saw that pathetic excuse for a man lay his hands on you, I saw every man who ever disrespected her, and I made a promise to myself, right there in that ballroom. I will not fail you the way my father failed her. I will keep you and your son safe. I will build walls so high and so strong that no one can ever touch you. I will eliminate any threat, past, present, or future. I finally understood. This wasn't about me. Not really. It was about him. I was a ghost. A chance for him to rewrite the most traumatic chapter of his life. He wasn't just protecting me. He was protecting the memory of his mother. My son wasn't just a sick child. He was the boy Dante had been, helpless to save the person he loved most. The possessiveness, the control, the absolute authority, it all stemmed from a wound that had never healed. It didn't make it right. It didn't make the cage any less of a cage, but it made it understandable. It humanized the monster, and that, I realized, was far more dangerous. It was easy to hate a monster. It was much harder to hate a man in pain. So I am your redemption? I asked softly. His expression hardened again, the mask of command slamming back into place. You are my responsibility, he corrected. Do not romanticize it. This is a practical arrangement. I am offering you a life of absolute security. In return, I require your absolute compliance. Can you accept those terms? I thought of Leo, breathing easily in the next room. I thought of the eviction notice, and the gnawing hunger, and the constant, soul-crushing fear. I looked at this powerful, broken man who saw his mother's ghost in my eyes. I was trading my freedom for my son's life. There was no trade to be made. There was only one path. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I accept your terms." A single, sharp nod was his only response. "Good. Sophia will see to your needs. We will speak again this evening." He turned back to his desk, picking up his phone as if I were already gone. The audience was over. I walked out of the library and back to my suite, the conversation replaying in my mind. He had laid his cards on the table, revealing a hand filled with wealth, power, and deep, unhealed trauma. He had given me the reasons for my imprisonment, wrapped them in the language of protection and responsibility. And I, with my eyes wide open, had agreed to be locked away. I had walked into the gilded cage and handed him the key. As I opened the door to my rooms, I could hear Leo laughing at the cartoon on the television. It was the first time I had heard him laugh in weeks. The sound was both my justification and my sentence. The days that followed settled into a strange and surreal routine. My world shrank to the confines of Dante's estate, a sprawling kingdom of manicured gardens, shimmering pools, and stone-faced guards who watched my every move from a distance. It was beautiful, serene, and utterly suffocating. I spent my mornings with Leo, administering his nebulizer treatments, and watching with a swelling heart as the color returned to his cheeks and the energy to his small body. The doctor came every other day, and each time his report was more positive. Leo was thriving. The clean air, the good food, the absence of stress, it was all working. He was healing, and for that, I was shackled to Dante Moretti by a gratitude so profound it felt like a physical chain. In the afternoons, while Leo napped under Sophia's watchful eye, I would explore. I walked the garden paths, trailed my fingers in the cool water of the infinity pool, and spent hours in the vast library, losing myself in books I'd never had the time or money to read. It was a life of enforced leisure, a stark contrast to the frantic, exhausting pace of my previous existence. But beneath the placid surface, a current of anxiety ran deep. I was a guest, a prize, a responsibility, but I was not free. Dante was a powerful, often absent presence. He would leave early in the morning in a convoy of black cars, and return late at night. Our interactions were brief, almost formal. He would inquire about Leo's health. He would ask if I needed anything. He would watch me with that same intense, possessive gaze that made my skin prickle. We ate dinner together most nights in a dining room so large our voices echoed. The meals were exquisite, served by silent staff, but the conversations were stilted. I would tell him about Leo's day. He would listen, his expression unreadable, and offer terse comments about his own. He spoke of business, of shipments and territories, in vague, coded terms. It was a glimpse into his world, a world of ruthless commerce that I knew was just the clean facade for something much darker. One evening, about a week into my stay, the fragile piece of our arrangement was shattered. We were at dinner when Roman entered the dining room, his usual impassive mask disturbed by a flicker of urgency. He leaned down and murmured something in Dante's ear. I watched as Dante's body went rigid, his hand tightening around his wineglass. "Where?" Dante's voice was a low growl. "Local arcade, about 5 miles from the estate. One of our perimeter patrols spotted him," Roman replied, his voice equally low but audible in the cavernous room. He was asking questions. About the house, about a woman and a child who were brought here. Dante's eyes, black as obsidian, flicked to me. "Falcone," he bit out, the name tasting like a curse. I had heard the name before, whispered in news reports about gangland disputes. The Falcone family, Dante's chief rivals. "They know you're here," he said to me, his voice dangerously calm. "They are testing my defenses, seeing if they can find a weakness." The implication was terrifyingly clear. I was the weakness. My presence here, which was supposed to guarantee my safety, had just put a target on my back. What are you going to do?" I asked, my food forgotten, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. "I am going to remind them why they should fear me," he said, standing up and throwing his napkin onto the table. "Roman, Double the patrol. I want eyes on every inch of this property. No one gets in, and no one gets out. His eyes met mine, and the command was unspoken but absolute. My confinement was no longer just a term of our agreement. It was now a vital necessity. You and the boy will not leave the main house until I tell you it is safe. Am I understood? Yes, I whispered, my throat tight. He and Roman swept out of the room, leaving me alone with the remnants of our meal. The beautiful house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap again. The gilded cage had become a fortress under siege, and I was the treasure locked inside. The fear I had been holding at bay came rushing back, cold and sharp. I had escaped Mark's pathetic desperation only to land in the middle of a war between kings. The tension in the house became a palpable thing over the next few days. The number of guards doubled. I saw them everywhere, stoic and alert, their dark suits a stark contrast to the lush greenery. The silence of the estate was no longer peaceful, it was watchful. I kept Leo inside, inventing games to play in the library and the cavernous living room, trying to shield him from the anxious energy that permeated the very walls. Dante was a storm cloud of controlled fury. He was on the phone constantly, his conversations short, sharp, and always in Italian. I saw him less, but I felt his presence more. He was a predator pacing the boundaries of his territory, and the threat to me and Leo had sharpened his focus to a razor's edge. One afternoon, I was in the suite, watching Leo draw at a small table, when Sophia knocked and entered, her face unusually pale. "Miss Vance," she said, her voice strained. "Mr. Moretti needs to see you." In his office. Dante's office was different from the library. It was a modern command center, all sleek black furniture, and an entire wall of monitors displaying security feeds from around the property. Dante was standing in front of them, his back to me. Roman stood beside him. One of the screens was frozen on a grainy image of a man getting into a car. "Alara," Dante said without turning around, "I need you to look at this." I walked closer, my heart beginning to pound. He pointed to the frozen image. The man was nondescript, but there was something about the slump of his shoulders, the cheapness of his jacket. "It's Mark," I breathed, a cold dread washing over me. "Yes," Dante said, his voice hard as granite. "It seems your ex-boyfriend did not appreciate his relocation. He has a gambling problem, as you know, and a great deal of debt. The Falcons found him. They paid him for information about you, about Leo." The betrayal was so profound, so utterly predictable, and yet it still hit me like a physical blow. Even now, Mark was finding ways to endanger us, selling his son's safety for a handful of cash. The men who were watching the arcade, Dante continued, finally turning to face me. His eyes were burning with a cold fire. They were Falcone's soldiers. They were there to meet him. They were planning to use him to get to you, to create a distraction, draw my men away from the house, and take you. My legs felt weak. I gripped the back of a chair for support. They wanted to take me, to use me as a pawn against Dante. Because of Mark. The tendrils of my old life were still wrapped around me, pulling me back into the darkness. "We have him," Roman said, his voice a flat, emotionless statement of fact. "Mark, he's in custody." I didn't want to ask. I was terrified of the answer, but I had to. What are you going to do with him?" Dante looked at me, his face a mask of cold resolve. "I am going to permanently remove the threat he poses to you and your son." I gave him a warning. He chose to ignore it. He chose to align himself with my enemies and put you in their crosshairs. There are no more warnings. The finality in his voice was absolute. This was his world. This was his justice. Swift, brutal, and final. I thought of the man who was the father of my child, as pathetic and loathsome as he was. A part of me, the nurse, the person I used to be, recoiled in horror. But another part of me, the mother who had seen her son's life put up for sale, was terrifyingly numb. Mark had made his choice. He had chosen the Falcons' money over his own son's life. "Do what you have to do," I whispered, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. I was endorsing this. I was complicit. Dante gave a single, sharp nod. He looked at Roman. You know what to do. Make it clean. Then send a message to Nico Falcone. Let him know what happens to the dogs he hires. Let him know that the woman and child in this house are not a weakness. They are the reason I will burn his entire world to the ground." Roman left without a word. I stood there, shaking, in the center of Dante Moretti's war room. He had used the external threat of the Falcons to justify his control, to turn his home from a cage into a fortress. And now, he was using that same threat to eliminate the last, pathetic remnant of my past. He was systematically erasing the life of Alara Vance and creating a new one for Alara, his possession. And I was letting him. I was watching him do it. He came to stand in front of me, his presence overwhelming in the tense, silent room. He reached out, not to touch me, but to gently brush a stray strand of hair from my face. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender it made me flinch. "This is why you must stay. Here," he said, his voice softer now, almost a murmur. "This is why you must obey the rules. The world outside these walls is not safe for you. Not anymore. They see you as my property, which makes you a target. Here, you are not a target. You are protected. I will not let them touch you, Alara. I swear it on my mother's grave." His promise was both a comfort and a curse. He was my protector, my savior, my jailer. The lines were so blurred I couldn't tell them apart anymore. All I knew was that my son was safe upstairs, and the man who had just sentenced my ex-boyfriend to an unknown fate was the reason why. I looked into his dark, stormy eyes and saw the boy who had lost his mother, now a king willing to go to war to prevent it from ever happening again. And I, for better or for worse, was his cause. The 24 hours after Dante gave the order concerning Mark were the longest of my life. I didn't ask for details, and none were offered. Roman was absent from the house, and a grim, focused energy settled over Dante. He spent the entire time in his office, the door closed, the low murmur of his voice on the phone, a constant, ominous presence. I tried to distract myself, playing with Leo, reading to him, but my mind was a vortex of guilt, fear, and a terrifying cold pragmatism. Mark had been a cancer in my life, and Dante was the ruthless surgeon cutting him out. I hated the method, but a dark, secret part of me couldn't deny the relief that came with the thought of him being gone for good. The next evening, Roman reappeared. He found Dante and me in the library, where I was trying to focus on a novel, while Dante stared into the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Roman didn't even glance at me. He spoke directly to his boss. "It's done," he said, his voice flat. "The personal threat has been neutralized. He will not be a problem again." Neutralized. The word was so clinical, so sterile. It was a word meant to hide the ugliness of the act. Dante gave a slow nod, his eyes still on the flames. "And the message to Falcone?" "Delivered," Roman confirmed, "along with a small part of the messenger. I don't think there will be any confusion about your position." I felt sick. A small part of the messenger. My imagination, vivid and gruesome from years in emergency rooms, filled in the blanks. I closed my eyes, the book slipping from my fingers and falling to the floor with a soft thud. Both men turned to look at me. Dante's expression was hard, but there was a question in his eyes. He was gauging my reaction. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I opened my eyes and met his gaze. I would not fall apart. I would not be the weak, hysterical woman he had to manage. This was the world I had accepted. These were the consequences of his protection. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. A flicker of respect, or perhaps surprise, crossed his face. He seemed to have expected tears or accusations. Instead, I was meeting the horror of his world with a cold, quiet acceptance. It was a chilling realization that I was already changing, being molded by this environment. "Good," he said. He turned back to Roman. "Now for the larger problem. Falcone will retaliate. He's proud. He won't take this public humiliation lying down. I want to hit him before he has a chance to hit us. A full-scale operation. Cut the head off the snake." I watched as the atmosphere in the room shifted from the resolution of a personal problem to the planning of a war. Roman began to speak in low tones, mentioning warehouses, shipping routes, and key personnel. They were talking about dismantling an empire. about a level of violence and strategy that was utterly beyond my comprehension. I was witnessing the mobilization of a private army. Men were being called. Weapons were being prepared. Dante was no longer just the master of his mansion. He was a general on the eve of battle. He was leaving. He was going out there, into that world of violence, to fight a war that had, in part, been started because of me. The thought sent a new, different kind of fear through me. It wasn't fear for my own safety. The fortress was secure. It was fear for him. He must have seen the change in my expression. He stopped his conversation with Roman and walked over to me, crouching down so his eyes were level with mine. The scent of his whiskey and the ever-present cedar was close, intimate. "I have to handle this, Ilara," he said, his voice low and for my ears only. "It's the only way to ensure this ends, permanently. While I am gone, Roman's men will be here. You will be the most protected person in the state. Nothing will get to you or Leo." "When will you be back?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. The need to know was a physical ache. "When it's finished," he said simply. He reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was firm, possessive, yet surprisingly gentle. It sent a jolt of heat through my entire body. "Don't be afraid." He stood up, his face once again an unreadable mask of command. "Roman, let's go." I watched him walk out of the library, his broad shoulders straight, a king going to war. The heavy doors closed behind him, and the silence he left in his wake was deafening. The next 2 days were an agony of waiting. The house was quiet, too quiet. The guards were a constant, silent presence. But Dante's absence was a gaping hole in the fabric of my new reality. I found myself looking for him in the hallways, listening for the sound of his car in the driveway. I told myself it was just anxiety, the fear of being left in a precarious situation. But it was more than that. I missed his intensity. I missed the unnerving, focused way he looked at me. I missed the dangerous, thrilling sense of security he provided. I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake in the massive, empty bed, staring into the darkness, my mind filled with terrible images of what might be happening out there in the city's underbelly. I would check on Leo a dozen times a night, his peaceful sleep a stark contrast to my own turmoil. On the third night, I was in the library, unable to rest, when I heard it. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, a convoy of cars. My heart leaped into my throat. I ran to the window, peering through a gap in the heavy curtains. It was his car, the lead vehicle in a procession of 3. They were back. I rushed to the foyer, my heart hammering. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, my hand gripping the cold marble balustrade as the front door opened. Roman entered first, his face grim. Then came Dante. He looked exhausted. There were new, deep lines of fatigue etched around his eyes. His clothes were disheveled, and there was a dark, ugly bruise high on his cheekbone. But he was alive. He was standing. He was home. The relief that flooded through me was so powerful it made me dizzy. He looked up and saw me standing there. Our eyes met across the vast, empty space. He said something to Roman, who nodded and began issuing quiet orders to the other men who had filed in. Dante started up the stairs, his movements weary but deliberate. He didn't stop until he was standing in front of me. He looked down at me, his stormy eyes searching my face. He lifted a hand and gently touched the bruise on his cheek. "A souvenir," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. Is it over?" I whispered. "It's over," he confirmed. The Falcone family is no longer a concern. The simple, declarative statement held the weight of untold violence. He had gone to war and won. He had burned his enemy's world to the ground, just as he had promised. And he had done it for me, for his responsibility, for the ghost of his mother. Without thinking, without considering the implications, I reached out and put my hand on his chest. I could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath my palm. It was the most reassuring feeling in the world. "You're hurt," I said, my nurse's instincts kicking in, overriding everything else. "Let me see." I led him not to my suite, but to his, an enormous masculine space of dark woods, leather, and steel that I had never entered before. I sat him down on the edge of his unmade bed and went into the adjoining bathroom, another cavern of black marble and chrome. I found a first aid kit, my hands moving with a familiar, practiced efficiency. When I came back, he was watching me, his expression one of weary curiosity. I sat beside him and gently began to clean a shallow cut above his eyebrow that I hadn't noticed before. He was perfectly still, his body radiating a heat that seemed to seep into my own. The air was thick with unspoken things. The professional distance I had tried to maintain was gone, burned away in the crucible of my fear for him and the overwhelming relief of his return. "You were worried," he stated, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't lie. Not now. Not when he was this close. "About your safety? Or about mine?" he pressed, his eyes searching mine. I stopped dabbing at the cut and looked at him. The silence stretched, filled with the truth I was too afraid to speak. He knew the answer. I could see it in his eyes. He reached up and caught my hand, the one holding the antiseptic wipe, his grip firm and warm. "Alara," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of triumph or possession. It was something else entirely. It was slow and deep and filled with a raw, desperate vulnerability that mirrored my own. It spoke of fear and relief, of violence and tenderness, of two broken people finding an anchor in a storm. I kissed him back, all my fear and anxiety and confusion melting away into this one, undeniable point of contact. My hand left his chest to tangle in his dark hair, and his other arm came around my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. In that moment, he wasn't the Mafia king, and I wasn't his prisoner. We were just a man and a woman who had been to the edge of a precipice and had found their way back, together. When the kiss finally broke, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "Stay with me tonight," he whispered. It was the first time he had ever asked me for anything, instead of commanding it. And I, who had entered this house as a captive, gave him my answer without a single word, my surrender complete and absolute, not to the king, but to the man. The morning after was quiet and still. I woke tangled in his arms, the pale dawn light filtering through the massive windows of his bedroom. The scent of him, of cedar and sleep, and the faint metallic tang of his healing wounds enveloped me. For the first time since I had arrived, I didn't wake with a jolt of anxiety. I felt calm, safe. The storm had passed, both outside the fortress walls and within me. Dante was still asleep, his harsh face softened, the lines of stress and command erased. The bruise on his cheek was darker now, a stark reminder of the violence he had unleashed to keep us secure. I gently traced the line of his jaw, marveling at the contrast between the man who waged wars and the man lying here beside me, his breathing deep and even. He had torn down my world and rebuilt it around himself, and last night, I had finally stopped fighting and started living in it. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him, and pulled on one of his shirts that had been discarded on the floor. It fell to my mid-thigh, ridiculously large, but it felt like a shield, an emblem of the night we had shared. I padded to the window and looked out. The grounds were peaceful, the guards less conspicuous now that the immediate threat was gone. It was over. All of it. Mark was gone. The falcons were gone. The constant, grinding fear that had defined my life was gone. All that was left was this man, and the new, uncertain reality he represented. A little while later, he stirred. I turned from the window as he sat up, running a hand through his messy hair. He looked at me, standing there in his shirt, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was the first one I had ever seen, and it hit me with the force of a physical blow, making my heart do a strange, flipping thing in my chest. "Good morning," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Good morning," I replied softly. We were quiet for a moment, the space between us filled with a new, comfortable intimacy. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer just his responsibility. He had let me in, shown me his vulnerability, and in doing so, had given me a power of my own. "Alara," he said, his expression turning serious. He patted the space on the bed next to him. Come here. I sat down, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. I didn't know what to expect. The threats are gone, he began, his voice steady and measured. The external ones and the personal ones. You and Leo are safe now. Truly safe. He took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine, which means our original arrangement has changed. The reasons for your confinement no longer exist. A cold knot of fear began to form in my stomach. I knew what was coming. I am a man of my word, he continued, his gaze unwavering. I offered you a choice when you first came here, but it was no choice at all. I am offering you a real one now. He took a deep breath. If you want to leave, you can. I will not stop you. I will buy you a house, anywhere in the country you want to go. I will set up a trust, a fund for you and Leo that will mean neither of you ever have to worry about money again. I will arrange for discreet, permanent security to watch over you from a distance. You can have your freedom back. You can be a Lara Vance, nurse, mother, and live a normal life. All you have to do is say the word. He laid it all out, a perfect, clean escape. It was everything I should have wanted. Freedom, independence, a normal life for my son. A few weeks ago, I would have wept with gratitude for such an offer. But now, the thought of leaving this house, of leaving him, felt like tearing a part of myself away. The gilded cage had become a home. The jailer had become my anchor. Tears pricked my eyes, and I looked down at our joined hands. I thought of my old life, the constant struggle, the loneliness. Then I thought of the last few weeks, the safety, the strange peace, the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of being the absolute center of this powerful man's universe. I thought of his confession in the library, of the wounded boy still hiding inside the king, and I thought of the way my heart had stopped when I thought he might not come back from his war. And what is the other choice? I asked, my voice thick with emotion. He tightened his grip on my hand. The other choice, he said, his voice dropping to that low, intense murmur that made my skin tingle, is that you stay, not as my responsibility, not as my guest. You stay as my partner, as my woman. You stay here, with me, and we build a life together. You and Leo, with me. He lifted my hand and pressed a kiss to my knuckles, his eyes never leaving mine. I want you to stay, Alara, more than I have ever wanted anything. The sincerity in his voice was overwhelming. He was giving me the world, but all he truly wanted was for me to choose him. The choice was clear. It had been clear since the moment I saw him walk back through that door, bruised but victorious. My old life was a ghost. My future was sitting in front of me. I'm not a Lara Vance anymore, I said softly, a single tear tracing a path down my cheek. I don't think she exists. I took a shaky breath and met his intense gaze. I want to stay, with you. The relief that washed over his face was profound. The king, the conqueror, the man who commanded armies and bent the world to his will, looked at me as if I had just handed him the most precious victory of his life. He pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. Thank you, he whispered, the words muffled against my skin. It was a word I never thought I would hear from him, a word that spoke volumes of his own fears. This was my choice, conscious, deliberate. I was no longer a victim of circumstance, no longer a damsel in distress. I was a woman who had seen the darkness and had chosen to stay in the arms of the man who controlled it, because in those arms, I had finally found my light. Our new life began that day. The last vestiges of the prisoner and jailer dynamic dissolved, replaced by a deep and passionate partnership. We were a team. I learned more about his business, the legitimate fronts and the shadowy underpinnings. He, in turn, began to open up, sharing stories of his childhood, of the immense pressure of his name, of the loneliness that had defined his life until he heard my voice across a crowded ballroom. He was still dominant, still possessive, but his control was now tempered with a deep and abiding respect. He made no decisions that affected me or Leo without discussing them with me first. The fortress became a home, filled not with silence, but with Leo's laughter and the easy intimacy of a family being born. About a month later, on a warm evening, He took me for a walk in the gardens. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. We walked in comfortable silence to a secluded stone gazebo at the edge of the property, overlooking the distant, twinkling lights of the city. He stopped me under the arch of the gazebo and turned to face me. He seemed nervous, a state so foreign on him that it immediately put me on high alert. "Alara," he began, taking both of my hands in his, "I have spent my entire life building an empire of power and wealth. I control everything and everyone in my world. But for the last few months, you have been the one in control. You control my heart, my happiness, my future." My own heart began to pound. "My mother's life was a tragedy because she was never given a choice," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She was taken. I gave you a choice, and you chose to stay. You chose me. It is the greatest gift I have ever received." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. "I don't want you to be my woman anymore, Alara. I want you to be my wife." He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a ring. It wasn't a modern, flashy diamond. It was a vintage piece, a stunning sapphire, the color of a deep twilight sky, surrounded by a delicate halo of smaller, antique-cut diamonds. It was elegant, timeless, and breathtakingly beautiful. "This was my mother's," he said softly, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It was the one thing she owned that my father didn't buy for her. It belonged to her mother. It was the only piece of her old life she kept. She told me she wanted me to give it to the woman I would love and respect, the woman who would be my queen, not my possession." He looked at me, his heart in his eyes, the powerful mafia king completely and utterly vulnerable. "Be my wife, Alara. Be my queen. Let me spend the rest of my life protecting you, loving you, and being the man you and Leo deserve." Tears were streaming down my face, but I was smiling. I was so full of love and joy it felt like I might burst. This incredible, dangerous, broken, and beautiful man wanted to make me his wife. He was offering me not just his protection, but his name, his heart, his legacy. "Yes," I whispered, the word a happy sob. "Yes, Dante. Of course, yes." A radiant smile broke across his face. He slid the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it, sealing his promise. Then he pulled me into his arms and kissed me. A deep, loving kiss filled with all the promises of our future. Later that night, I stood on the balcony of our bedroom, the sapphire on my finger cool against my skin, glinting in the moonlight. Dante came up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. We looked out over the quiet, peaceful grounds of our home. Leo was sleeping soundly in his room down the hall, his breathing clear and healthy, his nightmares long gone. It was a world I never could have imagined for myself, born from a moment of sheer desperation and a chance encounter. I had lost everything, and in doing so, I had found it all. I was no longer afraid. I was no longer alone. I was safe. I was loved. I was home. I leaned back against Dante's solid chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my back, and watched the stars begin to appear in the night sky, each one a tiny, brilliant promise of the hopeful future that was finally ours.